The wind howled like a banshee across the Arctic tundra, carrying ice crystals that struck the reinforced windows of Research Station Bravo 7 with the force of tiny bullets. Inside the station's observation dome, Dr. Elena Vasquez sat completely still, her breath forming small clouds in the -22 Celsius air as she turned another page of her worn paperback copy of The Perfect Storm. The irony wasn't lost on her, reading about maritime disasters while potentially living through a meteorological one. Most people would have been huddled near the station's heating units, wrapped in every piece of thermal gear they could find. But Elena had always been different. Growing up in Minnesota's brutal winters had taught her that the cold was just another element to understand and respect, not fear. Besides, the observation dome offered the best view of the approaching weather system that had every meteorologist from Greenland to Alaska talking in hushed, worried tones. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Elena adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses and glanced at her tablet, where real-time atmospheric data streamed in from dozens of weather stations across the Arctic Circle. What she saw made her stomach tighten with concern. The low-pressure system approaching their position wasn't just another Arctic storm. It was something unprecedented, a perfect collision of atmospheric conditions that could create a weather event unlike anything in recorded history. Research Station Bravo 7 was supposed to be a routine assignment. As one of the Navy's leading atmospheric physicists, Elena had been sent to this remote outpost in northern Alaska to study the effects of climate change on Arctic weather patterns. The station, jointly operated by the U.S. military and the National Weather Service, was positioned at one of the most geologically and meteorologically significant points on the continent. It was here that warm Pacific currents met the Arctic ice, creating a natural laboratory for studying extreme weather phenomena. But what Elena was seeing on her instruments suggested that this particular storm system was about to turn their research station into ground zero for a meteorological catastrophe. The atmospheric pressure readings were dropping faster than anything in the historical record. Wind speeds at the storm center were approaching Category 5 hurricane levels. But this wasn't a hurricane. It was something entirely different, something that conventional weather models couldn't predict or explain. Elena had been tracking the system for 72 hours, ever since the first anomalous readings appeared on satellite imagery. What started as an unusual low-pressure area over the Bering Sea had rapidly intensified into a massive spiral of clouds and wind that defied every established pattern of Arctic weather formation. The storm was moving inland with unprecedented speed and power, and Research Station Bravo 7 lay directly in its path. She closed her book and stood up, her joints protesting slightly from sitting motionless in the cold for so long. Through the dome's panoramic windows, she could see the storm's outer bands approaching like a wall of white death. The wind had picked up significantly in the past hour, and the temperature was continuing to drop. According to her instruments, we're looking at wind chills approaching -60 degrees Fahrenheit once the storm's center passed over our location. The station's communication array crackled to life, startling Elena from her thoughts. Research Station Bravo 7, this is Elmendorf Control. Do you copy? The voice was crisp and professional, cutting through the static with military precision. Elena moved to the communications console and keyed the microphone. Elmendorf Control, this is Dr. Vasquez at Bravo 7. I copy you loud and clear. Dr. Vasquez, we're showing some concerning readings from your location. Can you confirm current weather conditions and provide an updated forecast? Elena glanced at her instruments again, noting that several readings had worsened even in the few minutes since she'd last checked them. Elmendorf, conditions are deteriorating rapidly. We're looking at sustained winds of 45 knots with gusts up to 70. Barometric pressure is at 28.15 inches and dropping fast. Temperature is -22 Celsius and falling. Based on current atmospheric models, this system is going to be significantly more severe than initially predicted. There was a pause on the other end of the transmission, followed by what sounded like multiple voices discussing something urgently in the background. When the radio operator came back online, his voice carried a new note of tension. Dr. Vasquez, stand by for priority traffic. Elena felt her pulse quicken. In her 8 years of military service and subsequent work as a civilian contractor, she'd learned that priority traffic usually meant something serious was about to happen. She waited, listening to the static and the increasingly violent wind outside. Dr. Vasquez, this is Colonel Marcus Webb, commander of the 354th Fighter Wing at Eielson Air Force Base. We have a situation developing that requires your immediate expertise. Elena had heard of Colonel Webb. He was legendary in military aviation circles, a former Thunderbird pilot who had transitioned to commanding one of the most elite F-16 squadrons in the Air Force. The fact that he was personally on the radio suggested this was far more serious than a routine weather advisory. Colonel Webb, this is Dr. Vasquez. I'm listening. Doctor, we have a search and rescue operation that's about to turn critical. A civilian research team got stranded on the ice about 200 miles northeast of your position when their transportation broke down. They've got maybe 12 hours of survival gear left, and this storm system you're tracking is going to make any rescue attempt extremely dangerous, if not impossible. Elena pulled up a map on her tablet, quickly calculating distances and storm trajectories. Her heart sank as she realized the full scope of the problem. The stranded research team was positioned almost exactly where the storm's eye was projected to pass. They would be facing the full fury of the system with no shelter and rapidly dwindling supplies. Colonel, I'm looking at the atmospheric data now. The storm center is going to pass directly over that area in approximately 8 hours. Anyone caught in the open when that happens, she paused, not wanting to voice the obvious conclusion, won't survive. I know, Doctor. That's why we need to get them out before the storm reaches them. The problem is none of our conventional weather forecasting is giving us accurate information about this system. Our meteorology unit is telling us one thing, but their predictions keep changing every hour. We need someone who understands what we're really dealing with here. Elena stared at the swirling mass of data on her screens, her mind racing through calculations and atmospheric models. The storm was unlike anything she had ever studied, but she was beginning to see patterns in the chaos. Dangerous, deadly patterns that could make a rescue attempt suicidal if not properly understood and planned for. Colonel Webb, she said finally, I think I can help you, but you need to understand, this isn't just a bad storm. What's coming is going to rewrite the textbooks on Arctic weather systems. If we're going to get those people out alive, we're going to need to do something that's never been attempted before. The silence that followed Elena's words seemed to stretch across the hundreds of miles between Research Station Bravo 7 and Eielson Air Force Base. Finally, Colonel Webb's voice crackled back through the radio, carrying the weight of command decision and desperate urgency. Dr. Vasquez, I need you to spell out exactly what we're dealing with here. My pilots are the best in the world, but they can't fly blind into something they don't understand. What makes this storm different? Elena pulled up multiple displays on her workstation, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she compiled the most critical data points. Years of training and experience had taught her how to distill complex meteorological information into actionable intelligence that military personnel could use to make life-and-death decisions. Colonel, what you're looking at is a polar mesocyclone, essentially a hurricane-strength storm system that's formed in Arctic conditions. The problem is, these systems aren't supposed to exist. The atmospheric physics that create them require a very specific set of conditions that meteorologists have always assumed were impossible in Arctic environments. She paused to check her latest readings, noting with growing concern that the storm had intensified even further in just the past few minutes. The storm is being powered by an interaction between unusually warm Pacific air masses and extremely cold Arctic air. When these two systems collide, they're creating a spiral effect that's generating winds exceeding 120 miles per hour at the center. But here's the critical part. The system is also creating what we call wind shear layers. Wind shear layers? Webb's voice carried the sharp attention of a pilot who understood that wind shear could kill aviators faster than enemy fire. Imagine the atmosphere as having invisible barriers at different altitudes, with winds moving in completely different directions and speeds. At 2,000 feet, you might have winds from the north at 60 knots. At 3,000 feet, winds from the south at 40 knots. At 4,000 feet, winds from the east at 80 knots. An aircraft trying to navigate through these layers would be subjected to forces that could tear it apart or send it into an unrecoverable spin. Elena could hear background conversation at Eielson Air Force Base, multiple voices discussing flight parameters and mission possibilities. She continued her analysis, knowing that every detail could mean the difference between a successful rescue and a catastrophic loss of life. Colonel, what you're looking at is a polar mesocyclone, essentially a hurricane-strength storm system that's formed in Arctic conditions. The problem is these systems aren't supposed to exist. The atmospheric physics that create them require a very specific set of conditions that meteorologists have always assumed were impossible in Arctic environments. She paused to check her latest readings, noting with growing concern that the storm had intensified even further in just the past few minutes. The storm is being powered by an interaction between unusually warm Pacific air masses and extremely cold Arctic air. When these two systems collide, they're creating a spiral effect that's generating winds exceeding 120 miles per hour at the center. But here's the critical part. The system is also creating what we call wind shear layers. Wind shear layers? Webb's voice carried the sharp attention of a pilot who understood that wind shear could kill aviators faster than enemy fire. Imagine the atmosphere as having invisible barriers at different altitudes, with winds moving in completely different directions and speeds. At 2,000 feet, you might have winds from the north at 60 knots. At 3,000 feet, winds from the south at 40 knots. At 4,000 feet, winds from the east at 80 knots. An aircraft trying to navigate through these layers would be subjected to forces that could tear it apart or send it into an unrecoverable spin. Elena could hear background conversation at Eielson Air Force Base, multiple voices discussing flight parameters and mission possibilities. She continued her analysis knowing that every detail could mean the difference between a successful rescue and a catastrophic loss of life. The other critical factor is visibility. This isn't just snow or ice crystals we're dealing with. The storm is generating what's called a whiteout condition, essentially a wall of suspended ice particles that can reduce visibility to zero in a matter of seconds. Your pilots wouldn't just be flying blind, they'd be flying through an environment where their instruments might not even function properly due to ice accumulation and electromagnetic interference. Colonel Webb's response was immediate and professional. Dr. Vasquez, I understand the challenges you're outlining, but I have 6 people on the ice who are going to die if we don't get them out. What I need to know is whether there's any way at all to execute a successful rescue mission. Elena stared at her screens, her mind processing hundreds of variables simultaneously. The meteorologist in her wanted to tell the colonel that the mission was impossible, that no rational analysis of the data would support sending aircraft into such conditions. But another part of her, the part that had joined the Navy because she believed science should serve to save lives, not just study phenomena, was already working on solutions. Colonel, what might be a way, but it would require precise timing and a flight path that goes against everything conventional wisdom would suggest. I'm listening, Doctor. Elena pulled up a 3-dimensional model of the storm system, rotating it to show the internal structure that her instruments were revealing. Every storm system has what we call mesocyclone cores, essentially columns of rotating air that extend from the surface to the upper atmosphere. Most pilots are trained to avoid these cores at all costs because they represent the most dangerous areas of the storm. She highlighted several areas on her display, noting how the cores were positioned relative to the stranded research team's location. But here's what's different about this system. The cores are creating temporary gaps in the wind shear layers. If a pilot could time their approach perfectly and fly directly through one of these cores, they could potentially reach the surface with minimal exposure to the chaotic wind conditions surrounding them. That sounds like flying directly into the eye of a tornado, Doctor. It's worse than that, Colonel. A tornado's eye is relatively small and moves in predictable patterns. These mesocyclone cores are hundreds of feet wide, they're moving in complex 3-dimensional patterns, and they're only stable for minutes at a time. A pilot would need to identify the core, calculate its movement, and execute a precision descent through what amounts to a rotating cylinder of air traveling at hurricane speeds. Elena paused, knowing that her next words would either provide hope for a rescue mission or confirm that 6 people were about to die on the Arctic ice. But if it could be done, if a pilot had the skill and the precise meteorological guidance, they could potentially reach the research team during one of the brief calm periods between core passages.
The radio was quiet for nearly a minute, and Elena could imagine the intense discussions taking place at Eielson Air Force Base. She used the time to refine her calculations, running multiple scenarios through her atmospheric modeling software. What she was proposing was essentially meteorological suicide, but it was also the only option that offered even a remote chance of success. When Colonel Webb came back on the radio, his voice carried the weight of a man who had made countless life and death decisions throughout his military career. Dr. Vasquez, I need you to understand something. I have pilots who have flown combat missions in Iraq and Afghanistan, who have executed search and rescue operations in conditions that would ground civilian aircraft. But what you're describing, this is beyond anything we've ever attempted. Elena nodded, even though the colonel couldn't see her. I know, Colonel. And I need you to understand that even with perfect execution, the chances of success are minimal. We're talking about threading a needle while riding a roller coaster in the dark. What would you need from us to maximize those minimal chances? Elena had been hoping he would ask that question because it meant he was seriously considering the mission despite the overwhelming odds. I would need real-time communication with your pilots throughout the entire operation. Every decision would need to be based on atmospheric data that I'm collecting here at Bravo 7. Wind speeds, pressure differentials, core positions, everything would need to be coordinated to the second. She pulled up another display showing the storm's projected path over the next 8 hours. I would also need detailed information about your aircraft capabilities, maximum and minimum flight speeds, rate of climb and descent, how much ice accumulation the engines can handle before flaming out. This isn't going to be a standard search and rescue operation. It's going to be more like threading a spacecraft through an asteroid field. Colonel Webb's response came quickly, as if he had already made his decision before asking the question. Dr. Vasquez, I'm going to patch you directly into our Flight Operations Center. You'll have access to our meteorology unit, our flight data, and direct communication with our pilots. But I need to ask you something first. Elena waited, sensing that whatever question was coming would be critical. Doctor, in your professional opinion, what are the realistic chances of bringing everyone home alive? Elena stared at her instruments, at the swirling mass of data that represented one of the most dangerous weather systems ever recorded. She thought about the 6 researchers huddled somewhere on the ice, probably watching the approaching wall of clouds and knowing that they were facing their last few hours of life. She thought about the pilots who would be asked to fly into conditions that could kill them before they ever reached the rescue site. Colonel Webb, she said finally, if we do nothing, 6 people are going to die with absolute certainty. If we attempt this rescue, we might lose everyone, the research team and your air crews. But we might also save them all. In meteorology, we deal in probabilities and risk assessments. This situation is beyond probability. It's about whether we're willing to risk everything to give 6 people a chance at life. The colonel's response was immediate and decisive. Dr. Vasquez, you are now the senior meteorological advisor for Operation Arctic Shield. Welcome to the team.
Elena's hands moved across her keyboard with practiced efficiency as secure communication channels opened between Research Station Bravo 7 and Eielson Air Force Base. Within minutes, her screens filled with real-time data streams from military satellites, weather reconnaissance aircraft, and ground-based monitoring stations across Alaska. For the first time since the storm began developing, she had access to the full scope of information needed to understand what they were truly facing. Dr. Vasquez, this is Major Sarah Chen, Flight Operations Officer at Eielson. I'm coordinating the rescue mission from our command center. We've got your data feeds integrated into our systems now. Elena studied the new information flowing across her displays, her excitement growing despite the dire circumstances. The military's weather reconnaissance capabilities were far beyond anything available to civilian researchers, and the detailed atmospheric measurements were revealing aspects of the storm that she had only theorized about. Major Chen, this is incredible data. I'm seeing pressure gradients and wind vectors that confirm my hypothesis about the mesocyclone structure. The cores are definitely following predictable mathematical patterns, even though they're moving through 3-dimensional space. Elena highlighted several areas on her main display where spiral patterns were emerging from what had initially appeared to be chaotic turbulence.
Look at these formations at the 17,000-foot level. The cores are actually synchronized with the storm's primary rotation, which means we can predict their positions up to 15 minutes in advance. Major Chen's voice carried a note of professional interest that Elena recognized from her own years in uniform. Doctor, that's significantly longer than our initial estimates suggested. How accurate are these predictions? Under normal circumstances, I'd say plus or minus 30 seconds for timing and approximately 50 meters for spatial positioning. But we're not dealing with normal circumstances. Elena pulled up wind speed data that made her stomach tighten. The storm has intensified beyond my worst-case projections. We're now looking at sustained winds of 140 miles per hour with gusts exceeding 180. Elena paused her analysis as new data appeared on her screen. Thermal imaging from a reconnaissance satellite that was passing over the stranded research team's location. What she saw made her realize just how desperate the situation had become. Major Chen, I'm looking at thermal signatures from the research team's position. They're showing significant heat loss patterns. Based on the infrared data, I'd estimate they have maybe 6 hours of survival time remaining, not the 12 hours we initially calculated. The implications of this revelation hung heavy in the air between the two facilities. Elena could hear increased activity in the background at Eielson, voices calling out coordinates, aircraft engines spinning up, the controlled urgency that preceded military operations where lives hung in the balance. Dr. Vasquez, this is Colonel Webb again. I need you to give me your best assessment for a launch window. When can we realistically execute this mission? Elena studied the storm's progression, mentally calculating dozens of variables related to aircraft performance, weather conditions, and rescue logistics. What she was seeing painted a picture of a very narrow window of opportunity, one that was closing rapidly. Colonel, based on current storm movement and the deteriorating condition of the research team, we have one viable launch window. The mission would need to begin in exactly 3 hours and 17 minutes. The aircraft would reach the rescue site during a temporary stabilization of the mesocyclone cores, and weather conditions would be marginal but manageable for approximately 27 minutes. Elena highlighted the critical time frame on her display, showing how the storm's internal structure would create a brief period of relative calm over the rescue site. After that window closes, the storm's eye wall will pass directly over their position. Nothing will survive that passage, not the research team, and definitely not any aircraft attempting a rescue. Colonel Webb's response was immediate. Dr. Vasquez, I'm going to put you in direct contact with Captain Jake Morrison, my squadron leader. He'll be piloting the lead aircraft for this mission. I need you to walk him through exactly what he'll be facing out there. Elena's screen flickered as a new communication channel opened, and she found herself looking at a live video feed from Eielson's briefing room. Captain Morrison appeared to be in his early 30s, with the calm confidence that Elena had learned to associate with elite military pilots. Behind him, she could see other aircrew members studying weather charts and aircraft performance data. Dr. Vasquez, Captain Morrison here. I understand you're going to be my eyes and ears for this mission. I need you to tell me what flying through one of these mesocyclone cores is going to feel like. Elena had been dreading this question because the honest answer was that nobody knew what it would feel like. It had never been attempted before. But she also knew that military pilots needed concrete information to make critical decisions, not scientific uncertainties. Captain Morrison, based on the atmospheric data I'm seeing, flying through a mesocyclone core will be like descending through a vertical tornado. You'll experience rapid pressure changes that will affect your aircraft's performance and your own physical condition. The rotation of the core will create forces that try to spin your aircraft, and you'll need to maintain precise control inputs to stay on course.
Elena pulled up a three-dimensional simulation of core passage that she had created using her latest atmospheric measurements. The most critical phase will be the transition zones, entering and exiting the core. At these points, you'll experience sudden changes in wind direction and speed that could exceed your aircraft's design limitations if you're not prepared for them. Captain Morrison studied the simulation data, his expression growing more serious as he absorbed the implications. Doctor, what about visibility inside the core itself? That's actually the one advantage we have, Captain. The center of the core should be relatively clear, similar to the eye of a hurricane. You'll have near zero visibility approaching the core, then sudden improvement once you're inside, then near zero visibility again as you exit. The key is maintaining precise navigation during the blind phases. Elena paused, knowing that her next words would either give the captain confidence or convince him that the mission was impossible. Captain, I want you to understand something. What we're asking you to do has never been attempted by anyone, anywhere, under any circumstances. There are no training manuals for this kind of operation, no established procedures, no safety protocols. You'll be making history, assuming you survive to tell about it. Captain Morrison's smile was grim but determined. Dr. Vasquez, I've been flying F-16s for 12 years, including combat missions that weren't supposed to be survivable. The way I see it, 6 people are going to die if we don't try this, and they're definitely going to die if we don't try it. Those odds are good enough for me. Elena felt a surge of respect for the pilot's attitude, but she also knew she had a responsibility to ensure he understood the full scope of what he was facing. Captain, there's one more thing you need to know. The electromagnetic interference inside the storm is going to affect your instruments. Your GPS will be unreliable, your communications will be intermittent, and your radar might not function at all. You'll be flying by sight and feel for extended periods. That's why we have you, Doctor. You'll be tracking us from your station and providing guidance when our instruments fail, right? Elena nodded, though she wasn't entirely certain her own equipment would continue functioning as the storm intensified around Research Station Bravo 7. That's the plan, Captain. I'll maintain constant communication and provide real-time updates on core positions, wind conditions, and navigation guidance. But you need to understand that if my station loses power or my communications go down, you'll be completely on your own out there. Captain Morrison's expression grew thoughtful as he considered this possibility. Doctor, in your professional opinion, what's the single most important thing I need to remember during this mission? Elena had been thinking about this question since the moment she first understood what would be required for a successful rescue. Her answer came from years of studying extreme weather phenomena and understanding how they could kill people who underestimated their power. Captain Morrison, remember that the storm is alive. It's not just wind and weather. It's a dynamic system that's constantly changing and adapting. What's true about wind conditions at one moment might be completely different 30 seconds later. Trust your instruments when you have them. Trust my guidance when you can hear me. But most importantly, trust your instincts as a pilot. If something feels wrong, it probably is wrong. Elena paused, looking at the storm data that continued to worsen by the minute. And Captain, those 6 people on the ice are counting on you to bring them home. But there are also people here who are counting on you to come home yourself. Don't be so focused on the rescue that you forget about your own survival. Captain Morrison nodded solemnly. Understood, Doctor. We'll see you on the other side of this thing. As the communication channel closed, Elena turned back to her instruments and the approaching storm. In less than 3 hours, she would guide military aircraft into weather conditions that could kill everyone involved. The magnitude of that responsibility settled over her like a physical weight, but she also felt a familiar surge of determination that had carried her through every challenge of her career. Outside the observation dome, the first ice crystals from the storm's outer bands were beginning to strike the reinforced windows with increasing frequency. The real battle for 6 lives was about to begin.
Elena spent the next hour immersed in the most complex atmospheric analysis of her career, her fingers flying across multiple keyboards as she integrated data from dozens of sources into a comprehensive picture of the storm's internal structure. The weather monitoring systems at Research Station Bravo 7 were designed for routine Arctic observations, but Elena had pushed them far beyond their intended capabilities, transforming her isolated outpost into a sophisticated meteorological command center. The storm continued to intensify at an alarming rate, defying every conventional model of Arctic weather formation. Elena's screens showed wind speeds that were approaching the theoretical maximum for atmospheric circulation, with pressure drops that suggested the system was drawing energy from sources that meteorologists were only beginning to understand. Climate change was creating new types of storms, and this polar mesocyclone was potentially the most dangerous example ever recorded. Dr. Vasquez, this is Major Chen at Eielson. We're showing some concerning readings from your station. Are you maintaining full power and communications capability? Elena glanced at her power management display, noting that the station's generators were working harder than usual to maintain operations against the increasingly severe conditions. The structure of Research Station Bravo 7 had been designed to withstand extreme Arctic weather conditions, but the approaching storm was testing every system beyond its design parameters. Major Tent, we're stable for now, but I'm showing increased power demand from the heating systems and communication array. The storm's electromagnetic interference is also starting to affect some of our more sensitive instruments. Elena paused to check her backup power systems, ensuring they would activate automatically if the main generators failed. I estimate we have reliable operation for approximately 6 more hours under current conditions. Understood, Doctor. We're also tracking the storm's effects on our own systems here at Eielson. We may need to adapt our communication protocols as the interference increases. Elena nodded, though she was increasingly concerned about maintaining contact with the rescue mission once it launched. The polar mesocyclone was generating electromagnetic disturbances that could disrupt radio communications across hundreds of miles, and Research Station Bravo 7 was positioned almost directly beneath the storm's most intense electromagnetic activity. Major Chen, I'm uploading a detailed analysis of the mesocyclone core patterns to your systems now. I've identified 17 distinct cores within the storm structure, and I'm tracking their movement patterns with increasing accuracy. Elena highlighted the most critical information on her display, showing how the cores were arranged in a complex 3-dimensional spiral that rotated around the storm's center. The key insight is that these cores follow mathematical progressions that can be predicted. It's similar to the orbital mechanics of planetary systems, complex, but governed by predictable physical laws. Elena paused as new data appeared on her screen, thermal imaging from the research team's location that made her heart race with urgency. Major, I'm seeing critical changes in the thermal signatures from the stranded team. They're showing signs of severe hypothermia, and their shelter appears to be failing. We may have less time than initially calculated. The implications of this development were immediately clear to both women. If the research team's condition was deteriorating faster than expected, the already narrow window for rescue was becoming even more critical. Elena began recalculating flight paths and timing based on the assumption that the team might not survive much longer in the increasingly severe conditions. Dr. Vasquez, this is Captain Morrison. I'm monitoring your data feeds from our aircraft preparation area. Can you give me updated timing for the launch window? Elena pulled up her most recent atmospheric projections, noting that the storm's acceleration was actually creating a slightly earlier opportunity for core passage. Captain Morrison, the launch window has moved up by approximately 23 minutes. You'll need to be airborne in 2 hours and 54 minutes to reach the rescue site during the optimal core alignment. Elena paused, studying wind speed data that showed the storm's intensity continuing to increase beyond all predictions. Captain, I need to warn you that conditions are going to be significantly worse than our initial projections. We're now looking at sustained winds of 160 miles per hour, with core rotation speeds approaching 200 miles per hour. These are hurricane-force conditions in Arctic temperatures. Captain Morrison's response carried the calm professionalism that Elena had learned to associate with elite military pilots. Dr. Vasquez, I understand the conditions are extreme. What I need to know is whether the core transit technique will still work under these intensified conditions. Elena ran rapid calculations through her atmospheric modeling software, testing the viability of core passage under the worsening storm parameters. What she found was both encouraging and terrifying from an aviation safety perspective. Captain, the increased intensity is actually working in our favor from a navigation standpoint. The cores are more clearly defined and their movement patterns are more predictable.
However, the margin for error has essentially disappeared. Any deviation from the precise flight path could result in your aircraft being torn apart by wind shear forces. Elena pulled up a three-dimensional simulation showing the updated core passage requirements, with flight paths that looked more like threading a needle than conventional aviation navigation. You'll need to maintain positioning accuracy within plus or minus 50 feet throughout the entire core transit. At the speeds you'll be traveling, that translates to reaction times measured in milliseconds. Dr. Vasquez, I've been flying precision formations for over a decade. 50-foot accuracy is challenging, but manageable under normal conditions. What about the effects of the core rotation on aircraft control? Elena had been studying this particular aspect of the storm's behavior, and her findings were both fascinating and alarming from an aviation safety perspective. Captain, the core rotation will create something similar to what helicopter pilots experience in auto-rotation, but much more intense. Your aircraft will want to rotate along with the core spin, and you'll need to apply constant counterpressure to maintain level flight. Elena highlighted specific data points showing how the rotational forces would affect different types of aircraft. The good news is that F-16s have excellent roll rate capability and responsive control systems. The bad news is that you'll be fighting these rotational forces while simultaneously navigating through rapidly changing wind conditions and maintaining precise positioning for the rescue operation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Captain Morrison was quiet for several moments, and I could imagine him mentally rehearsing the complex series of maneuvers that would be required for a successful mission. When he finally responded, his voice carried a note of determined focus that reminded Elena why these pilots had been selected for such a critical operation. Dr. Vasquez, I need you to walk me through the exact sequence of events from core entry to rescue completion. I want to understand every phase of this operation in detail. Elena pulled up her most detailed analysis of the core transit process, breaking it down into specific phases that Captain Morrison could use for mission planning. Phase 1 is core approach. You'll be flying through extremely low visibility conditions with wind gusts that could exceed your aircraft's structural limits. I'll be providing constant navigation updates, but you'll need to rely primarily on instrument flying techniques. Elena highlighted the critical transition point on her display, where aircraft would move from chaotic storm conditions into the relative calm of the core center. Phase 2 is core entry. This is the most dangerous part of the entire operation. You'll experience sudden wind shifts exceeding 100 miles per hour in less than 5 seconds. Your aircraft will be subjected to forces that could cause structural failure if you're not perfectly positioned. Elena paused to ensure Captain Morrison was absorbing the complexity of each phase before continuing. Phase 3 is core transit. Once you're inside the core, you'll have approximately 15 minutes of relative calm to locate the research team and execute the rescue. Visibility will improve dramatically, but you'll still be flying through a rotating column of air at high altitude over Arctic terrain. Elena's voice grew more serious as she described the final phase of the operation. Phase 4 is core exit and return transit. This will be even more challenging than entry because you'll be carrying additional weight from the rescued personnel, and the core may have shifted position during your time on the ground. Plus, your fuel reserves will be running low, leaving no margin for navigation errors or extended search time. Captain Morrison absorbed this information with the focused attention of a pilot preparing for the most challenging mission of his career. Dr. Vasquez, what's our backup plan if something goes wrong during any of these phases? Elena had been dreading this question because the honest answer was that there was no viable backup plan. The operation was so dependent on precise timing and perfect execution that any significant deviation would likely be catastrophic. Captain, the nature of this operation means that backup plans are extremely limited. If something goes wrong during core transit, you'll need to abort the rescue and attempt to exit the core along your original path.
Elena paused, knowing that her next words would weigh heavily on everyone involved in the mission. If something goes wrong during the rescue phase itself, you'll have to make a command decision about whether to attempt emergency procedures or abandon the rescue to save your own crew. I can provide atmospheric guidance, but I can't make those tactical decisions for you. Captain Morrison's response was immediate and decisive. Dr. Vasquez, I understand the risks and the limitations. What I need from you is the best possible atmospheric guidance and real-time updates throughout the mission. My job is to bring everyone home, the research team and my aircrew. Your job is to give us the information we need to make that happen. Elena felt a surge of respect for the pilot's attitude and determination. Captain Morrison, I want you to know that you'll have my complete focus and expertise throughout this operation. I've been studying extreme weather phenomena for 15 years, and I've never encountered anything as challenging as what we're facing. But I've also never worked with a pilot who I trusted more to execute an impossible mission. As the communication channel closed, Elena returned to her atmospheric analysis with renewed determination. In less than 3 hours, she would guide military aircraft into the most dangerous weather conditions ever encountered by aviation. The responsibility was overwhelming, but she also felt the familiar surge of excitement that came with pushing the boundaries of scientific knowledge in service of saving lives. Outside Research Station Bravo 7, the storm's outer bands were now striking with increasing frequency and power, and the temperature continued to drop toward levels that would challenge the station's life support systems. The real test was about to begin.
The next hour passed in a blur of intense preparation as Elena coordinated with multiple teams across the Alaska Military Command structure. Her role had evolved from isolated weather researcher to the critical nexus of information for the most complex rescue operation in Arctic aviation history. Every decision, every calculation, every prediction she made would directly impact the survival of both the stranded research team and the aircrews attempting their rescue. Elena's communication displays showed constant activity from Eielson Air Force Base, where Captain Morrison and his squadron were conducting final aircraft preparations and mission briefings. She could see live feeds from the hangar where F-16 Fighting Falcons were being modified with specialized equipment for Arctic operations, additional survival gear, cold weather modifications, and extended-range fuel tanks that would give the aircraft the endurance needed for the lengthy search and rescue mission. Dr. Vasquez, this is Master Sergeant Rodriguez, Eielson Aircraft Maintenance. I need to consult with you about aircraft modifications for extreme weather operations. Elena had worked with military maintenance personnel throughout her career, and she understood that their expertise in aircraft systems could be critical for mission success. Sergeant Rodriguez, I'm seeing your aircraft preparation data. What specific modifications are you implementing? Doctor, we're primarily concerned about ice accumulation on critical flight surfaces and engine intakes. Under normal Arctic conditions, we have established de-icing procedures, but the storm conditions you're describing are beyond anything in our experience. Elena pulled up her atmospheric analysis showing the types of ice formation that would occur within the storm system, noting that the combination of extreme cold and high moisture content would create ice accumulation patterns that could disable aircraft within minutes. Sergeant Rodriguez, you're dealing with what we call supercooled water droplets, essentially liquid water that exists below freezing temperature and instantly freezes on contact with aircraft surfaces. Elena highlighted specific temperature and moisture data that showed how rapidly ice would form under storm conditions. In the mesocyclone cores, you're looking at ice accumulation rates that could exceed 2 inches per minute on leading edges of wings and control surfaces. Standard de-icing systems won't be sufficient for these conditions. Sergeant Rodriguez's response carried the concern of someone who understood that aircraft performance degradation could kill pilots faster than enemy action. Dr. Vasquez, we're installing supplementary de-icing systems and heat exchangers, but we're also concerned about engine performance in extreme cold. At the temperatures you're projecting, jet fuel begins to gel, and engine oil becomes viscous enough to affect performance. Elena nodded, recognizing that these were exactly the types of technical challenges that could doom the mission even if weather navigation was successful. Sergeant, I recommend preheating all engine components and fuel systems immediately before launch. You'll also want to consider adding fuel additives that prevent gelling at extreme temperatures. Elena paused to study engine performance data that Sergeant Rodriguez was transmitting from the maintenance hangar. The other critical factor is engine air intake icing. In the storm conditions, ice can form in engine intakes faster than normal heating systems can remove it. You may need to implement continuous heating of all air intake surfaces throughout the mission. Dr. Vasquez, this is Captain Morrison. I'm monitoring your conversation with Sergeant Rodriguez. How will these ice accumulation issues affect flight performance during core transit? Elena had been studying this exact question because aircraft performance degradation could make precision navigation through the mesocyclone cores impossible. Captain Morrison, ice accumulation will primarily affect your control response rates and stall characteristics. You'll need to maintain higher airspeeds to prevent stall conditions, but higher speeds will also make precision navigation more difficult. Elena pulled up flight performance calculations showing how ice accumulation would affect F-16 handling characteristics under storm conditions. The critical factor is weight distribution. As ice accumulates unevenly across your aircraft surfaces, it will change your center of gravity and control balance. You'll need to constantly adjust your control inputs to maintain level flight. Captain Morrison absorbed this information with the focused attention of a pilot who understood that aircraft performance degradation was often more dangerous than enemy action. Doctor, will ice accumulation affect our ability to maintain formation during the mission? Elena realized that formation flying under these conditions would add another layer of complexity to an already impossible mission. Captain, formation flying through the mesocyclone cores will be extremely dangerous. The rotational forces and wind shear will affect each aircraft differently based on their exact position within the core. I strongly recommend single aircraft transit with minimum safe separation distances. Understood, Doctor. We're planning for single ship core transits with coordinated timing to minimize exposure time for each aircraft. Elena felt a surge of relief that the military planning teams were thinking through these operational details with the same level of precision she was applying to the meteorological aspects. Captain Morrison, there's another factor we need to discuss: communication reliability during the mission.
Elena pulled up electromagnetic interference data, showing how the storm's electrical activity would affect radio communications between aircraft and ground stations. The polar mesocyclone is generating electrical discharges similar to lightning activity in thunderstorms, but much more intense and sustained. Radio communications will be intermittent at best and completely impossible during certain phases of core transit. Captain Morrison's response carried the weight of understanding what communication loss would mean for mission coordination. Dr. Vasquez, what's our communication window during the rescue phase itself? Elena studied the electromagnetic interference patterns, noting that the core centers would actually provide some protection from the storm's electrical activity. Captain, once you're inside the mesocyclone cores, communication should improve significantly. The cores act as electrical shields, protecting you from the storm's electromagnetic interference. However, during approach and exit phases, you may have no communication capability with either ground stations or other aircraft. Elena paused, realizing the implications of communication loss for mission safety and coordination. This means that each phase of the operation will need to be precisely timed and executed according to predetermined plans. If something goes wrong and you can't communicate, you'll need to make critical decisions based on your training and the atmospheric guidance I can provide during communication windows. Dr. Vasquez, this is Colonel Webb. I've been monitoring your mission planning discussions, and I need to ask a direct question. In your professional assessment, what are the realistic chances of mission success under these conditions? Elena stared at her displays, studying the swirling mass of data that represented the most dangerous weather system she had ever encountered. The question demanded an honest answer based on scientific analysis, but she also knew that her response would influence life and death decisions for multiple people. Colonel Webb, based on standard risk assessment protocols, this mission would be classified as having minimal chances of success. We're asking pilots to execute maneuvers that have never been attempted in weather conditions that exceed the design limitations of their aircraft with communication and navigation systems that may not function properly. Elena paused, knowing that her next words would either provide hope or confirm that 6 people were going to die on the Arctic ice. However, I believe the mission is technically feasible if everything goes perfectly. The mesocyclone cores are following predictable patterns, the aircraft are being optimally configured for the conditions, and we have the most skilled pilots in the Air Force executing the mission. Colonel Webb's response was immediate and decisive. Dr. Vasquez, I need a percentage. What are the odds? Elena ran final calculations through her risk assessment software, factoring in all the variables she had identified throughout the planning process. Colonel, I estimate a 35% chance of complete mission success, meaning rescue of all stranded personnel with no loss of aircraft or aircrew. There's a 40% chance of partial success, rescue of some personnel with possible aircraft damage or loss. There's a 25% chance of mission failure with potential loss of all personnel involved. The silence that followed Elena's assessment stretched across the communication channels as everyone involved in the operation absorbed the stark reality of what they were attempting. Elena could hear background conversations at Eielson Air Force Base as commanders and pilots discussed the odds and made final decisions about mission execution. When Colonel Webb finally responded, his voice carried the weight of command responsibility and the determination that had made him one of the most respected officers in the Air Force. Dr. Vasquez, those odds are better than I expected given the conditions we're facing. The mission is approved. Operation Arctic Shield will commence in 97 minutes. Elena felt her pulse quicken as the reality of what was about to happen settled over her. In less than 2 hours, she would guide military aircraft into weather conditions that could kill everyone involved. But she also felt a familiar surge of determination and excitement, the same feeling she had experienced during every major challenge of her scientific career. Colonel Webb, Captain Morrison, and all personnel involved in Operation Arctic Shield, I want you to know that you'll have my complete focus and expertise throughout this mission. We're about to attempt something that will either save 6 lives or cost us many more. Either way, we're going to make history.
Elena spent the final hour before launch conducting the most intensive atmospheric analysis of her career, pushing Research Station Bravo 7's weather monitoring systems to their absolute limits. Every instrument, every sensor, every data feed was focused on creating the most detailed picture possible of the storm's internal structure and the constantly shifting positions of the mesocyclone cores that would determine the success or failure of Operation Arctic Shield. The storm had continued to intensify beyond all theoretical predictions, with wind speeds now approaching 200 miles per hour and pressure readings that defied conventional understanding of Arctic atmospheric physics. Elena's screens showed a weather system that was rewriting the textbooks on extreme weather phenomena, creating conditions that no aircraft had ever attempted to navigate. Dr. Vasquez, this is Captain Morrison. We're beginning final aircraft startup procedures. I need your updated assessment of core positions and timing for the rescue window. Elena pulled up her most recent projections, noting that the mesocyclone cores were following increasingly complex patterns as the storm continued to intensify. Captain Morrison, I'm tracking 17 distinct cores within the storm structure. The optimal rescue window is now confirmed for 13 minutes and 47 seconds after you enter the core transit phase. Elena highlighted the critical timing parameters on her display, showing how the alignment of multiple cores would create a brief period of relative stability over the research team's location. You'll have approximately 19 minutes of manageable conditions for the rescue operation before the storm's next core rotation cycle brings hurricane-force winds back to that area. Understood, Doctor. 19 minutes from touchdown to wheels up.
We've rehearsed the rescue procedures to complete the operation in 15 minutes, which gives us a 4-minute safety margin. Elena nodded, though she was acutely aware that 4 minutes was an extremely thin safety margin when dealing with weather conditions that could change in seconds. Captain, I need to emphasize that these timing calculations are based on current storm behavior. If the system's intensity continues to increase, or if the core rotation patterns change, I may need to provide updated timing during the mission. Elena paused to check her communication systems, ensuring that she would maintain contact with the rescue aircraft throughout their mission. I'm also monitoring electromagnetic interference levels, and I'm seeing intermittent disruption of radio communications. We may experience communication blackouts during certain phases of your flight. Captain Morrison's response carried the calm professionalism that Elena had learned to associate with elite military pilots facing impossible missions. Dr. Vasquez, we understand that communication may be unreliable. We're prepared to execute the mission based on predetermined timing if we lose contact with you. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Arctic temperatures around Research Station Bravo 7. The idea of military aircraft navigating through unprecedented storm conditions without meteorological guidance was terrifying, but she also understood that mission success might depend on the aircrew's ability to adapt to rapidly changing circumstances. Captain Morrison, if we lose communication during critical phases, I want you to remember that the mesocyclone cores move in predictable mathematical progressions. If you lose sight of the core boundaries, you can estimate their positions based on timing and rotation rates. Elena pulled up the mathematical models that governed core movement, translating complex atmospheric physics into practical navigation guidance that pilots could use under extreme stress conditions. The cores rotate clockwise at approximately 43 degrees per minute, and they move in spiral patterns that expand outward from the storm center at roughly 12 miles per hour. Got it, Doctor. 43 degrees per minute, 12 miles per hour outward spiral. We'll use those parameters if we lose communication or instrument navigation. Elena was impressed by Captain Morrison's ability to absorb complex meteorological data and translate it into practical flight operations. Captain, there's one more critical factor I need to warn you about. The storm is generating what we call wind burst phenomena, sudden, localized areas where wind speeds increase dramatically for brief periods. Elena highlighted these dangerous areas on her display, showing how wind bursts could appear anywhere within the storm system with little or no advance warning. These bursts can reach speeds of 250 miles per hour and can develop in less than 30 seconds. They're essentially invisible to conventional weather radar, and they can destroy aircraft that are caught unprepared. Captain Morrison absorbed this information with the focused attention of someone who understood that unknown threats were often more dangerous than recognized ones. Dr. Vasquez, how can we identify and avoid these windburst phenomena? Elena had been studying exactly this question because windburst avoidance could be critical for mission survival. Captain, the bursts are preceded by specific pressure and temperature signatures that my instruments can detect. I'll be monitoring for these precursor signals throughout your mission and providing advanced warning when possible. She paused, knowing that her next words would either provide confidence or confirm the impossibility of what they were attempting. However, the precursor signals only provide 30 to 60 seconds of advanced warning, and the bursts can move rapidly through the storm system. You'll need to be prepared to execute emergency maneuvers on very short notice. Understood, Doctor. We're trained for emergency maneuvers under combat conditions. We'll adapt those techniques for weather avoidance. Elena felt a surge of respect for the pilot's confidence and adaptability, but she also understood that weather-related emergency maneuvers were fundamentally different from combat aviation. Captain Morrison, I want you to understand that weather-related emergencies are different from combat situations. In combat, you're dealing with predictable human opponents who follow tactical patterns. Weather is completely unpredictable and doesn't follow any rules of engagement. Elena pulled up historical data showing how weather-related aircraft accidents occurred, noting that most were caused by pilots underestimating the power of natural phenomena. The storm doesn't care about your training, your experience, or your mission objectives. It will kill you without hesitation if you make a single mistake or encounter conditions beyond your aircraft's capabilities. Captain Morrison's response was immediate and decisive. Dr. Vasquez, I understand the risks and the unique challenges of weather-related operations. What I need from you is the best possible guidance and real-time updates throughout the mission. My job is to bring everyone home alive. Elena nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility that came with guiding aircraft into unprecedented danger. Captain Morrison, you have my word that you'll receive the most accurate and timely atmospheric guidance possible. I'll be monitoring every aspect of the storm and providing constant updates on conditions and navigation requirements. I paused as new data appeared on my screens, showing that the storm's electromagnetic interference was increasing to levels that could disrupt both aircraft instruments and ground-based communication systems. Captain, I'm seeing increasing electromagnetic interference that could affect both your aircraft systems and our communication capability. We may experience communication blackouts during certain phases of your flight. Understood, Doctor. We're prepared for communication blackouts and instrument degradation. We'll execute the mission based on predetermined parameters and your guidance when communication is available. Elena felt her pulse quicken as she realized that Operation Arctic Shield was about to commence regardless of the overwhelming challenges they faced. Captain Morrison, all personnel involved in this operation should understand that we're attempting something that has never been done before under conditions that exceed every known safety parameter. Elena paused, looking at the storm data that continued to worsen by the minute. But I also want everyone to know that the mathematical models support the feasibility of this mission if executed perfectly. The mesocyclone cores are predictable, the timing calculations are accurate, and we have the most skilled pilots in the world executing the operation. Captain Morrison's final response before launch carried the determination and confidence that Elena had learned to associate with military personnel facing impossible odds. Dr. Vasquez, Operation Arctic Shield is commencing now. Thank you for your expertise and guidance. We'll see you on the other side of this storm. As Elena watched the aircraft status displays showing F-16 Fighting Falcons beginning their takeoff procedures at Eielson Air Force Base, she felt a combination of excitement and terror that she had never experienced in 15 years of studying extreme weather phenomena. In the next few hours, she would either witness one of the greatest rescue operations in aviation history, or she would watch helplessly as military aircraft were destroyed by weather conditions beyond human comprehension. Outside Research Station Bravo 7, the storm's leading edge was now striking with hurricane force, and the temperature had dropped to minus 38 degrees Celsius. The battle for 6 lives was about to begin in earnest.
Elena watched her screens with laser-focused intensity as 2 F-16 Fighting Falcons lifted off from Eielson Air Force Base into conditions that no military aircraft had ever attempted to navigate. The radar signatures of Captain Morrison's flight appeared as small blips moving across her display, heading directly into the path of the most dangerous storm system ever recorded in Arctic regions. Arctic Shield Flight, this is Dr. Vasquez at Research Station Bravo 7. I have you on radar and am tracking your position relative to the storm's outer bands. You're currently 47 miles from the first mesocyclone core. Captain Morrison's voice crackled through the radio with characteristic calm professionalism, though Elena could detect the underlying tension that came with flying into unknown danger. Dr. Vasquez, Arctic Shield lead here. We're showing increasing turbulence and ice accumulation as we approach the storm perimeter. Visibility is dropping rapidly. Elena studied her atmospheric displays, noting that the aircraft were encountering exactly the conditions she had predicted based on her storm analysis. Arctic Shield lead, you're entering the storm's precipitation zone. Expect ice accumulation rates of approximately 1 inch per minute on leading edge surfaces. Activate all de-icing systems now.
Elena watched the aircraft's flight path on her tracking display, noting that Captain Morrison was maintaining precise navigation despite the increasingly severe conditions. Captain Morrison, I'm showing your position as optimal for the first core approach. The mesocyclone core you'll be transiting is currently centered at bearing 047 degrees, distance 32 miles from your current position. Roger, Dr. Vasquez. Arctic Shield lead shows bearing 047 degrees, distance 32 miles to first core. We're experiencing severe turbulence and visibility near zero, relying on your guidance for navigation. Elena felt the weight of responsibility settle over her as she realized that 2 military aircraft were now completely dependent on her meteorological analysis for survival. Any error in her calculations or storm tracking could result in the loss of aircraft and aircrew before they ever reached the stranded research team. Arctic Shield lead, I'm tracking the core's movement patterns and updating your navigation requirements in real time. The core is rotating clockwise at 41 degrees per minute and moving northeast at 14 miles per hour. Adjust your heading to 051 degrees to maintain optimal approach angle. Elena paused to check her communication systems as electromagnetic interference from the storm began to affect radio clarity. Captain Morrison, I'm detecting increasing electromagnetic interference that may disrupt our communications as you get closer to the core. If we lose contact, remember that core entry should occur in approximately 8 minutes from your current position. Captain Morrison's response was intermittent and filled with static, confirming Elena's concerns about communication reliability. Dr. Vasquez, Arctic Shield lead, experiencing heavy communication, understand 8 minutes to entry. Elena felt her heart rate increase as she realized that the aircraft were about to enter the most dangerous phase of the mission with degraded communication capability. She switched to her backup communication systems and boosted transmitter power to maximum levels, hoping to maintain contact through the storm's electromagnetic interference. Arctic Shield lead, this is Dr. Vasquez on backup communication channel. Can you read me? The response came through clearly, indicating that the backup systems were functioning properly despite the interference. Dr. Vasquez, Arctic Shield lead, reading you 5x5 on backup channel. We are approaching what appears to be a wall of solid white ahead of us. Elena checked her storm tracking displays, confirming that the aircraft were approaching the boundary of the first mesocyclone core. Captain Morrison, that's the core boundary you're seeing. You're about to enter the most dangerous part of this entire operation. As you pass through the boundary, you'll experience sudden wind shifts exceeding 100 miles per hour. Elena pulled up her most detailed analysis of core entry procedures, providing Captain Morrison with the precise guidance needed to survive the transition. Maintain current heading and airspeed until you see sudden clearing ahead. When visibility improves dramatically, you'll know you've entered the core center. At that point, adjust heading to 063 degrees and begin descent to rescue altitude. Understood, Dr. Vasquez, maintaining current heading and airspeed. Arctic Shield 2, are you ready for core entry? I heard the voice of Captain Morrison's wingman responding through the static and interference. Arctic Shield lead, Arctic Shield 2, ready for core entry, following your lead at safe separation distance.
Elena watched her displays with fascination and terror as the 2 aircraft approached the invisible boundary where calm air met hurricane-force winds rotating at incredible speeds. This was the moment of truth. Either her calculations were correct and the aircraft would successfully transit the core, or they would be torn apart by forces beyond their design limitations. Arctic Shield lead, you are now crossing the core boundary. Report conditions inside the core. For nearly 30 seconds, Elena heard nothing but static on the radio. Her instrument showed the aircraft had crossed into the mesocyclone core, but she had no confirmation that they had survived the transition. Finally, Captain Morrison's voice came through with startling clarity. Dr. Vasquez, Arctic Shield lead reporting successful core entry. Visibility has improved dramatically, and we're flying through what appears to be a vertical tunnel of clear air. This is incredible. We can see the storm wall rotating around us like the inside of a tornado. Elena felt a surge of relief and excitement as she realized that her atmospheric analysis had been correct. The mesocyclone cores did provide navigable passages through the storm, just as her calculations had predicted. Captain Morrison, congratulations on successful core transit. You are now in the eye of the storm, essentially flying through a vertical hurricane eye that extends from ground level to 30,000 feet. Elena checked her timing calculations, noting that the aircraft were ahead of schedule due to favorable wind conditions within the core. Captain, you're making excellent time through the core. Adjust heading to 063 degrees and begin descent to rescue altitude. The stranded research team is located approximately 47 miles northeast of your current position. Roger, Dr. Vasquez. Arctic Shield flight adjusting heading to 063 degrees and beginning descent. We have visual contact with the ground through the core, and conditions are much calmer than expected. Elena felt a moment of cautious optimism as she realized that the most dangerous phase of the mission, core entry, had been completed successfully. However, she also knew that the rescue operation itself would present entirely new challenges, and the aircraft would still need to exit the core and return to base through the same dangerous conditions. Arctic Shield lead, I'm showing optimal conditions for the rescue operation lasting for approximately 17 more minutes. After that time, the core rotation will bring hurricane force winds back to the rescue area. Elena paused to study her latest atmospheric data, noting that the storm continued to intensify as the rescue operation proceeded. Captain Morrison, I need to warn you that the storm is still growing stronger. Exit conditions will be more severe than entry conditions. We may need to modify our exit strategy based on real-time weather developments. Captain Morrison's response carried the focused attention of a pilot who understood that successful rescue was only half the mission. Understood, Dr. Vasquez. We'll complete the rescue operation as quickly as possible and be prepared for modified exit procedures. Elena watched her displays as the two F-16s descended toward the Arctic ice, where 6 researchers were waiting for salvation. Through her instruments, she could track every aspect of their approach: altitude, airspeed, heading, and position relative to both the rescue site and the constantly moving storm system that surrounded them. Arctic Shield lead, you are now 5 miles from the rescue site. The research team should be visible as thermal signatures against the ice surface. Be advised that their shelter has appeared to partially collapse, and thermal imaging suggests hypothermia conditions among the team members. Dr. Vasquez, Arctic Shield lead has visual contact with the rescue site. We can see the research team and their damaged shelter. Beginning rescue approach now. Elena held her breath as she watched the most critical phase of Operation Arctic Shield unfold on her screens. 2 military aircraft were about to attempt a rescue in conditions that challenged every known limit of aviation safety, guided by meteorological analysis that pushed the boundaries of atmospheric science. In the next few minutes, 6 people would either be saved or lost forever to the Arctic storm.
Elena monitored the rescue operation with intense focus as Captain Morrison and his wingmen executed precision maneuvers above the stranded research team. Her screens showed the aircraft maintaining perfect formation despite flying through conditions that would have grounded any civilian aircraft. Their movements coordinated with the mathematical precision that defined elite military aviation. Arctic Shield lead, this is Dr. Vasquez. I'm showing you're directly over the rescue site with optimal positioning for personnel recovery. The mesocycline core is maintaining stability, but I'm detecting pressure changes that suggest core movement beginning in approximately 14 minutes. Captain Morrison's voice came through the radio with the controlled urgency of a pilot executing a time-critical mission. Dr. Vasquez, Arctic Shield lead confirming personnel recovery in progress. We can see all 6 members of the research team, but they appear to be in severe hypothermic condition. 3 individuals are conscious and mobile, 2 are conscious but unable to move without assistance, and 1 appears to be unconscious. Elena felt her heart tighten as she realized that the rescue operation would be more complex than initially planned. Evacuating healthy personnel was one thing, but dealing with hypothermia victims in Arctic conditions while operating under extreme time constraints presented entirely new challenges. Captain Morrison, hypothermia evacuation will require modified procedures and extended time on the ground. Can your aircraft handle the additional weight and time requirements? Dr. Vasquez, we're prepared for extended rescue operations. Arctic Shield 2 is deploying rescue equipment now, and we're establishing emergency medical procedures for hypothermia treatment during evacuation.
Elena watched her atmospheric displays while monitoring the rescue operation, noting that the mesocyclone core was beginning to show signs of instability that could affect the aircraft's ability to exit safely. The storm's continued intensification was creating unpredictable variations in core behavior that could make return navigation extremely dangerous. Arctic Shield Lead, I need to advise you that the storm system is continuing to intensify beyond all predictions. The mesocyclone core you're operating in is showing increased rotation rates and pressure fluctuations that could affect stability. Elena paused to run rapid calculations on her storm tracking systems, trying to determine how long the core would remain navigable for aircraft operations. Captain Morrison, based on current storm behavior, I estimate you have approximately 11 minutes of stable core conditions remaining. After that, core exit may become impossible until the next stability cycle. Captain Morrison's response carried the weight of someone making life and death decisions under extreme pressure. Dr. Vasquez, we understand the time constraints. Arctic Shield 2 is completing personnel loading now. We'll be ready for departure in approximately 6 minutes. Elena felt a surge of relief that the rescue team was ahead of schedule, but she also knew that core exit would present challenges equal to or greater than core entry. The storm's intensification meant that conditions outside the core had worsened significantly since the aircraft had entered. Captain Morrison, I need to brief you on modified exit procedures. The storm has intensified to the point where standard core exit techniques may not be viable. Wind speeds outside the core are now approaching 220 miles per hour, with rotational forces that could exceed your aircraft's structural limits. Elena pulled up her most recent atmospheric analysis, showing how the intensified storm intensity would affect aircraft navigation during core exit. The exit boundary is now much more clearly defined, but also much more dangerous. You'll experience wind shear forces that could reach 8 Gs during the transition from core center to external storm conditions. Captain Morrison absorbed this information with the focused attention of a pilot who understood that exit procedures would determine whether everyone survived the rescue operation. Dr. Vasquez, what's our optimal exit strategy given the intensified conditions? Elena had been studying this exact question as the storm continued to develop beyond all theoretical models. Captain Morrison, I recommend a spiral ascent-exit technique. Instead of flying straight through the core boundary, you'll need to follow the core's rotation pattern while gradually climbing to a higher altitude where wind shear forces are less severe. Elena highlighted the complex three-dimensional flight path that would be required for safe core exit. You'll essentially be flying a helical pattern that matches the core's rotation while climbing at a rate that keeps pace with the core's vertical movement. It's more complex than standard exit procedures, but it should minimize exposure to the most dangerous wind shear zones. Understood, Dr. Vasquez. Spiral ascent exit following core rotation pattern. We'll need precise guidance on rotation rates and climb angles to execute this technique. Elena felt the weight of responsibility as she realized that her atmospheric analysis would need to provide split-second guidance for aircraft maneuvers that had never been attempted before. Captain Morrison, the core's rotating at 47 degrees per minute with vertical movement of approximately 800 feet per minute. You'll need to maintain a climb rate that matches core ascent while turning at a rate that keeps you within the stable air mass.
Elena paused to check her latest storm tracking data, noting that electromagnetic interference was increasing to levels that could disrupt communication during the critical exit phase. Captain, I'm also detecting increased electromagnetic interference that may affect our communication during exit procedures. If we lose contact, remember that core rotation is clockwise at 47 degrees per minute. Captain Morrison's response was immediate and professional. Dr. Vasquez, Arctic Shield Lead acknowledging all exit perimeters, 47 degrees per minute clockwise rotation, 800 feet per minute vertical climb rate. We're beginning departure procedures now. Elena watched her displays as the two F-16s lifted off from the rescue site, with 6 additional passengers, their aircraft now carrying maximum weight loads that would affect performance during the challenging exit maneuvers. The margin for error had essentially disappeared. Any mistake during core exit would likely be fatal for everyone aboard both aircraft. Arctic Shield Lead, I'm showing you are airborne with all rescued personnel, beginning core exit navigation in approximately 2 minutes. Remember that your aircraft performance will be affected by the additional weight, so maintain slightly higher airspeeds during all maneuvers. Roger, Dr. Vasquez. Arctic Shield flight airborne with all 6 rescued personnel. Aircraft performance is within acceptable parameters despite additional weight, ready for exit navigation guidance. Elena felt her pulse quicken as she watched the aircraft approach the core boundary, where calm air met hurricane-force winds. This was the moment that would determine whether Operation Arctic Shield was remembered as one of the greatest rescue operations in aviation history or as a catastrophic loss of life in conditions beyond human capability. Captain Morrison, you are now approaching core exit boundary. Begin spiral ascent now. Initial heading should be 084 degrees with a climb rate of 850 feet per minute to account for aircraft weight. Elena monitored every aspect of the exit maneuvers, her instruments tracking aircraft position, heading, altitude, and performance relative to the constantly moving storm system. The complexity of the navigation required constant adjustments based on real-time atmospheric data that changed by the second. Arctic Shield Lead, I'm adjusting heading to 091 degrees and increase climb rate to 900 feet per minute. The core boundary is shifting due to increased storm rotation. For several tense minutes, Elena guided the aircraft through the spiral ascent pattern, providing constant updates on heading and altitude as they navigated through the 3-dimensional maze of wind currents and pressure differentials that define the mesocyclone core structure. Dr. Vasquez, Arctic Shield Lead reporting successful core exit. We're now in external storm conditions, but maintaining level flight. Visibility is near zero, and we're experiencing severe turbulence, but aircraft systems are functioning normally. Elena felt a surge of relief and excitement as she realized that the most dangerous phase of Operation Arctic Shield had been completed successfully. Captain Morrison, congratulations on successful core exit. You're now in the storm's outer circulation, and conditions should gradually improve as you move away from the storm center. Elena checked her navigation displays, calculating the optimal return route to Eielson Air Force Base that would minimize exposure to the storm's most dangerous areas. Captain, I'm showing a return route that will take you around the southern edge of the storm. Total flight time to Eielson should be approximately 43 minutes under current conditions. Roger, Dr. Vasquez. Arctic Shield flight beginning return to base. All rescued personnel are conscious and receiving emergency medical treatment. Mission appears to be successful. Elena stared at her displays, hardly able to believe that Operation Arctic Shield had succeeded against overwhelming odds. 2 military aircraft had navigated through unprecedented storm conditions, rescued 6 people from certain death, and were now returning safely to base. It was a triumph of human skill, courage, and scientific analysis that would be studied for decades to come. Captain Morrison, this is Dr. Vasquez. I want to congratulate you and your entire team on the successful execution of the most challenging rescue operation in Arctic aviation history. What you've accomplished today will save lives and advance our understanding of extreme weather navigation for years to come. Captain Morrison's final transmission carried the satisfaction of a mission accomplished under impossible conditions. Dr. Vasquez, this mission wouldn't have been possible without your meteorological expertise and guidance. Your atmospheric analysis made the impossible possible. Arctic Shield flight is heading home with everyone alive.
Elena maintained constant communication with Arctic Shield flight as the 2 F-16s navigated through the storm's outer bands on their return journey to Eielson Air Force Base. Her screens showed the aircraft maintaining steady progress despite continued severe weather conditions, their flight path carefully calculated to avoid the most dangerous areas of the still intensifying storm system. Arctic Shield Lead, this is Dr. Vasquez. I'm showing you're clear of the storm's primary circulation and entering the outer precipitation zone. Weather conditions should continue to improve as you proceed toward Eielson. Captain Morrison's voice came through with increasing clarity as the aircraft moved away from the electromagnetic interference generated by the storm's center. Dr. Vasquez, Arctic Shield lead confirming improved conditions. We're still experiencing significant turbulence and icing, but visibility is improving and aircraft systems are functioning normally. Elena felt a deep sense of satisfaction as she watched the successful conclusion of Operation Arctic Shield. But she also knew that her work wasn't finished until the aircraft were safely on the ground. The storm continued to affect weather conditions across hundreds of miles, and return navigation required the same precision and attention to detail that had made the rescue possible. Captain Morrison, I'm monitoring your flight path and providing updates on weather conditions along your route. You'll encounter a band of severe icing conditions in approximately 12 minutes, but it should only last for about 6 minutes of flight time. Elena paused to check the condition of the rescued personnel, whose survival had been the entire purpose of the dangerous mission. Captain, how are the rescued team members responding to treatment? Are there any medical emergencies that might affect your return flight procedures? Dr. Vasquez, all 6 rescued personnel are conscious and stable. 2 individuals required intensive warming procedures for severe hypothermia, but our medical team reports that all vital signs are improving. No medical emergencies that would affect flight operations. Elena nodded with relief, knowing that medical emergencies during return flight could have complicated an already challenging navigation situation. Excellent news, Captain. That means you can maintain optimal flight parameters for weather avoidance without worrying about medical constraints. Elena turned her attention to analyzing the overall impact of the storm system, which continued to intensify even as the rescue operation concluded successfully. Her instruments showed that the polar mesocyclone had grown into the most powerful Arctic storm on record, with implications that extended far beyond the immediate rescue mission. Arctic Shield Lead, I want you to understand the historical significance of what you've accomplished today. You've successfully navigated through a storm system that represents a new category of Arctic weather phenomena. The techniques we developed for this mission will likely become standard procedures for extreme weather operations. Captain Morrison's response carried the professional humility that Elena had learned to associate with elite military personnel. Dr. Vasquez, the success of this mission was entirely dependent on your meteorological expertise and guidance. Without your atmospheric analysis and real-time navigation support, this rescue would have been impossible. Elena felt a warm sense of professional accomplishment, knowing that her years of studying extreme weather phenomena had culminated in saving 6 lives under conditions that pushed the boundaries of both meteorological science and aviation capability. Captain Morrison, this mission represents the best of what's possible when scientific expertise and military precision work together towards a common goal. Elena paused to study the storm's continued development, noting that the polar mesocyclone was beginning to show signs of weakening as it moved over increasingly cold Arctic terrain. I'm also pleased to report that the storm system is finally beginning to dissipate. Peak intensity appears to have occurred during our rescue window, and wind speeds are now decreasing as the system moves inland. That's excellent news, Dr. Vasquez. It means we executed this mission at exactly the right time. Any later and conditions might have been impossible even with your guidance. Elena checked her communication systems as the aircraft moved beyond the range of Research Station Bravo 7's primary radar coverage area. Captain Morrison, I'm showing you're now beyond my primary tracking range. Yilsing Control should be taking over navigation guidance for your final approach. Roger, Dr. Vasquez. Yilsing Control has established contact and providing approach guidance. We'll be on the ground in approximately 27 minutes. Elena felt a mixture of relief and melancholy as she realized that her direct involvement in Operation Arctic Shield was concluding. For the past few hours, she had been at the center of one of the most challenging rescue operations in aviation history, providing critical guidance that had made the difference between life and death for multiple people. Arctic Shield Lead, this is Dr. Vasquez signing off primary communication. Congratulations on the successful completion of Operation Arctic Shield. Your courage and skill under impossible conditions will be remembered as one of the greatest achievements in rescue aviation history. Captain Morrison's final response carried the gratitude and respect of someone who understood exactly how close they had come to catastrophic failure. Dr. Vasquez, thank you for your expertise, your guidance, and your dedication to saving lives under impossible conditions. This mission succeeded because of your scientific analysis and your willingness to push the boundaries of what was thought possible.
As the communication channels closed, Elena turned to assess the damage to Research Station Bravo 7 from the storm that had raged around her throughout the rescue operation. The station's structure had withstood the hurricane-force winds and extreme cold, but several monitoring systems had been damaged by ice accumulation and electromagnetic interference. Elena spent the next hour conducting a comprehensive analysis of the storm data she'd collected throughout Operation Arctic Shield, recognizing that her measurements represented the most detailed study ever conducted of a polar mesocyclone system. The information would be invaluable for future extreme weather research and for developing improved forecasting capabilities. Her preliminary analysis confirmed that the storm had indeed represented a new category of Arctic weather phenomenon, with characteristics that challenged fundamental assumptions about atmospheric physics in polar regions. The successful navigation through the mesocyclone cores had proven that these systems, while extremely dangerous, followed predictable mathematical patterns that could be understood and exploited for aviation purposes. Elena also recognized that her role in Operation Arctic Shield had demonstrated the critical importance of advanced meteorological analysis for military operations in extreme environments. Climate change was creating new types of storms and weather patterns that required new approaches to forecasting and navigation, and her work had shown how scientific expertise could be directly applied to life and death situations. As she compiled her final mission report, Elena reflected on the extraordinary sequence of events that had transformed her from an isolated researcher reading a book in -22-degree conditions to the key scientific advisor for one of the most challenging rescue operations in military history. The experience had validated her career-long belief that atmospheric science should serve to protect and save lives, not just advance theoretical understanding. Elena's communication console crackled to life with an incoming message from Eielson Air Force Base. Dr. Vasquez, this is Colonel Webb. Arctic Shield flight has landed safely with all personnel aboard. The rescued team members are receiving medical treatment and are expected to make full recoveries. Operation Arctic Shield is officially concluded as a complete success. Elena felt a wave of emotion as the full impact of the mission's success settled over her. 6 people who had been facing certain death on the Arctic ice were now safe, and the air crews who had risked their lives in unprecedented conditions had returned unharmed. The combination of scientific analysis, military skill, and human courage had achieved what conventional wisdom would have declared impossible. Colonel Webb, this is Dr. Vasquez. Thank you for including me in Operation Arctic Shield. It's been the most meaningful application of my scientific expertise in 15 years of studying extreme weather phenomena. I'm honored to have played a role in saving lives under such challenging conditions. Colonel Webb's response carried the gratitude of a military commander who understood the difference that scientific expertise had made in the mission's success. Dr. Vasquez, your contribution to this operation was absolutely critical. Without your atmospheric analysis and real-time navigation guidance, this rescue would not have been possible. The Air Force will be studying your techniques and applying them to future extreme weather operations. As Elena signed off from her final communication related to Operation Arctic Shield, she looked out through the reinforced windows of Research Station Bravo 7 at the gradually clearing Arctic landscape. The storm had passed, leaving behind pristine snow and ice that showed no trace of the historic events that had unfolded in the skies above.
Elena spent the following hours documenting every aspect of Operation Arctic Shield, recognizing that her atmospheric analysis and the mission's successful execution would fundamentally change how military aviation approached extreme weather operations. Her detailed records would serve as the foundation for new training procedures, equipment modifications, and meteorological support protocols that could save countless lives in future emergency situations. The storm had finally dissipated completely, leaving Research Station Bravo 7 surrounded by the pristine Arctic landscape that had been transformed by one of the most powerful weather events in recorded history. Elena's instruments showed that wind speeds had returned to normal levels, temperatures had stabilized, and atmospheric pressure had returned to typical Arctic ranges. Elena's communication console remained active with incoming messages from meteorological organizations, military commands, and research institutions around the world, all seeking details about the unprecedented storm system and the successful navigation techniques that had been developed during the rescue operation. The scientific implications of her work were already generating international interest. Dr. Vasquez, this is Dr. Margaret Chen from the National Weather Service Arctic Research Division. We've been monitoring the storm system you encountered, and we're requesting comprehensive data sharing for our extreme weather research programs. Elena felt pleased that her work during the crisis would contribute to broader scientific understanding of Arctic weather phenomena. Dr. Chen, I'm prepared to share all atmospheric data collected during the storm event and the rescue operation. The measurements represent the most detailed analysis ever conducted of a polar mesocyclone system. Elena pulled up her comprehensive storm database, noting that she had collected over 15 hours of continuous atmospheric measurements during the storm's development, intensification, and dissipation phases. I'm particularly interested in collaborating on analysis of the mesocyclone core structures. The navigation techniques we developed could have applications for both scientific research and emergency operations in extreme weather conditions. Dr. Chen's response carried the excitement of a researcher who understood the significance of Elena's discoveries. Dr. Vasquez, your core navigation analysis represents a breakthrough in our understanding of severe storm structure. We'd like to invite you to present your findings at the next International Conference on Arctic Meteorology. Elena nodded, already envisioning how her research could advance the field of extreme weather forecasting and emergency response capabilities. Dr. Chen, I'd be honored to present these findings to the international meteorological community. I believe this work could significantly improve our ability to predict and respond to similar storm events in the future. Elena paused to consider the broader implications of climate change for Arctic weather patterns, recognizing that the storm she had encountered might represent a preview of increasingly common extreme weather events. I'm also concerned that climate change may be creating conditions for more frequent polar mesocyclone formation. We need to develop better forecasting capabilities and response protocols before these storms become routine occurrences. As Elena concluded her conversation with the National Weather Service, her communication console activated with an incoming call from Eielson Air Force Base. The caller identification showed Colonel Webb's direct line, suggesting that the military was interested in ongoing collaboration related to extreme weather operations. Dr. Vasquez, this is Colonel Webb. I'm calling to discuss the long-term implications of Operation Arctic Shield for Air Force extreme weather capabilities. We are interested in establishing a permanent liaison arrangement with your research station for future operations. Elena felt a surge of professional excitement as she realized that her work was being recognized at the highest levels of military command. Colonel Webb, I'm very interested in ongoing collaboration between Research Station Bravo 7 and Air Force operations. The techniques we developed during the rescue could be refined and applied to a wide range of extreme weather scenarios. Elena pulled up her analysis of military applications for polar mesocyclone navigation, noting that the core transit techniques could be adapted for various types of aircraft and mission requirements. Colonel, I believe we could develop standardized training procedures for extreme weather navigation that would significantly expand Air Force operational capabilities in Arctic and subarctic regions. Colonel Webb's response indicated high-level military interest in developing these capabilities as a permanent operational advantage. Dr. Vasquez, the Air Force is prepared to invest significant resources in developing these extreme weather navigation capabilities. We're looking at establishing Research Station Bravo 7 as a center of excellence for military meteorological operations. Elena felt honored by the recognition of her work and the opportunity to contribute to military operational capabilities on a permanent basis. Colonel Webb, I would welcome the opportunity to work with the Air Force on developing these capabilities. The combination of advanced meteorological analysis and elite pilot training could create unprecedented operational advantages. Elena paused to consider the training and equipment modifications that would be required to implement extreme weather navigation as a standard military capability.
We would need to develop specialized training curricula, modify aircraft systems for extreme weather operations, and establish communication protocols that function reliably under severe electromagnetic interference conditions.
Colonel Webb's enthusiasm was evident in his response. Dr. Vasquez, the Air Force is prepared to support all of those development requirements. We're viewing this as a strategic capability that could provide decisive advantages in both combat and humanitarian operations. As Elena concluded her conversation with Colonel Webb, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in the span of a single day. She had begun the morning as an isolated researcher studying routine Arctic weather patterns, and she was ending it as a key contributor to one of the most significant advances in extreme weather aviation in military history. Elena turned to her personal journal, where she had been documenting her thoughts and experiences throughout her assignment at Research Station Bravo 7. The events of Operation Arctic Shield deserved careful reflection and analysis, both for their immediate significance and for their implications for her future career direction. Today, I participated in something that I never imagined would be possible when I began studying atmospheric physics, Elena wrote. The successful navigation through a polar mesocyclone system represents a convergence of scientific analysis, military skill, and human courage that achieved results beyond what any individual contribution could have accomplished alone. Elena paused in her writing to look out at the Arctic landscape, now peaceful and serene under the clear post-storm sky. The most important lesson from today's experience is that scientific knowledge becomes truly meaningful only when it's applied to serve human needs. My years of studying extreme weather phenomena found their ultimate purpose in helping to save 6 lives under impossible conditions. Elena continued writing, documenting her thoughts about the broader implications of the day's events. Operation Arctic Shield has also demonstrated that climate change is creating new challenges that require new approaches to scientific research and practical application. The storm we encountered today represents a preview of increasingly extreme weather events that will require innovative solutions and unprecedented cooperation between scientific and military communities. As Elena completed her journal entry, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction and purpose that had been missing from her research career despite its previous successes. The combination of scientific discovery and practical application that had defined Operation Arctic Shield represented exactly the kind of meaningful work that had motivated her to pursue atmospheric physics in the first place. Elena's communication console activated with one final message of the day, this one from Captain Morrison at Iselson Air Force Base. Dr. Vasquez, this is Captain Morrison. I wanted to personally thank you for your expertise and guidance during today's mission. Your atmospheric analysis made the difference between success and catastrophic failure. Elena felt touched by the pilot's personal acknowledgement of her contribution to the mission. Captain Morrison, it was an honor to work with you and your team during Operation Arctic Shield. Your skill and courage under impossible conditions were truly inspiring to witness. Captain Morrison's response carried the camaraderie that Elena had learned to associate with successful military operations. Dr. Vasquez, I hope we'll have the opportunity to work together on future missions. The techniques we developed today could be applied to many other extreme weather scenarios. Elena smiled as she realized that Operation Arctic Shield was not an ending, but a beginning of new possibilities for applying scientific knowledge to military and humanitarian operations. Captain Morrison, I look forward to future collaboration. Today's success has shown me that the most meaningful applications of scientific knowledge come from working with people who share a commitment to saving lives under the most challenging conditions. As the final communication ended, Elena settled back in her chair and picked up her worn copy of The Perfect Storm, the same book she had been reading when Colonel Webb first contacted her about the rescue mission. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had been reading about maritime disasters when she became involved in preventing an Arctic aviation disaster of unprecedented scope. Elena opened the book to her bookmark and began reading where she had left off.
but she found her mind returning to the events of the day and the possibilities that lay ahead. Tomorrow would bring new weather patterns to study, new challenges to analyze, and new opportunities to apply her expertise in service of others. But tonight, 6 people were alive who otherwise would have died, and 2 military air crews had returned safely from a mission that had pushed the boundaries of what was thought possible in aviation. Outside Research Station Bravo 7, the Arctic night was clear and calm, with stars visible in the pristine sky that had been hidden by the storm just hours earlier. Elena felt a deep sense of peace and accomplishment as she contemplated the extraordinary events that had transformed her from an isolated researcher into a key contributor to one of the most significant rescue operations in modern history.
6 months after Operation Arctic Shield, Dr. Elena Vasquez stood before an audience of military commanders, meteorologists, and aviation experts at the Pentagon, delivering a presentation that would fundamentally change how the world's air forces approached extreme weather operations. The conference room was filled with representatives from NATO countries, all eager to understand the revolutionary techniques that had made the impossible rescue mission successful. The key insight from Operation Arctic Shield, Elena explained to the assembled experts, is that extreme weather systems, no matter how chaotic they appear, follow predictable mathematical patterns that can be exploited for aviation purposes. The mesocyclone cores within polar storms create navigable corridors that, with proper guidance, allow aircraft to operate in conditions previously considered impossible. Elena clicked to her next slide, showing detailed atmospheric data from the historic rescue mission. The audience leaned forward with intense attention, recognizing that they were witnessing the birth of entirely new operational capabilities. The core transit technique we developed has since been successfully tested in 12 additional extreme weather scenarios, with a success rate of 100% when proper meteorological support is provided. General Patricia Hayes, the Air Force's Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations, raised her hand with a question that Elena had been expecting. Dr. Vasquez, what are the limitations of these techniques? Under what conditions would core transit be inadvisable or impossible? Elena had spent months analyzing this exact question, testing the boundaries of her atmospheric navigation techniques through computer modeling and controlled flight experiments. General Hayes, core transit becomes impossible when storm systems lack sufficient organization to create stable mesocyclone structures. This typically occurs during storm formation and dissipation phases, or in weather systems with insufficient energy to maintain organized circulation patterns. Elena paused to pull up additional data showing the specific atmospheric conditions required for successful core navigation. We've also identified critical threshold values for wind speeds, pressure differentials, and electromagnetic interference beyond which even the most advanced aircraft and skilled pilots cannot safely execute core transit maneuvers. Colonel Webb, who had been promoted following the success of Operation Arctic Shield, stood to address the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to emphasize that Dr. Vasquez's techniques have already been integrated into Air Force training curricula at 3 major bases. We've established the Arctic Weather Navigation School at Eielson Air Force Base, where pilots from around the world are learning these revolutionary procedures. Elena felt a deep sense of satisfaction as she realized how far her work had progressed from that freezing day at Research Station Bravo 7 when she had first received Colonel Webb's desperate radio call. Colonel Webb, I'd like to add that the training program has been expanded beyond core transit techniques to include comprehensive extreme weather navigation, ice accumulation management, and electromagnetic interference mitigation procedures. Elena clicked to her final slide, showing a world map with locations where extreme weather navigation techniques had been successfully applied. In the past 6 months, these procedures have been used in hurricane rescue operations in the Gulf of Mexico, typhoon relief missions in the Pacific, and winter storm search and rescue operations across northern Canada and Scandinavia. Admiral Sarah Mitchell, representing naval aviation, raised a question about maritime applications. Dr. Vasquez, have these techniques been adapted for shipboard operations or marine weather navigation? Elena nodded enthusiastically, as naval applications had become one of her most exciting areas of research expansion.
Admiral Mitchell, we've successfully adapted core transit principles for surface vessel navigation through extreme storm systems. The techniques are particularly effective for Coast Guard rescue operations and naval logistics in severe weather. Elena paused to consider the broader implications of her work, which extended far beyond the military applications that had initially motivated its development. We've also begun collaborating with civilian aviation authorities to develop extreme weather navigation procedures for commercial and private aviation aircraft. The goal is to reduce weather-related aviation accidents and expand operational capabilities for humanitarian relief operations. As Elena concluded her presentation, she reflected on how dramatically her career had changed since that day when she was quietly reading The Perfect Storm in the Arctic cold. Her work had evolved from theoretical research into practical applications that were saving lives around the world, and she had found the meaningful purpose that had always been missing from her academic career. Following the presentation, Elena was approached by Dr. James Patterson, director of the National Science Foundation's Atmospheric Research Division. Dr. Vasquez, the NSF is prepared to offer you a senior research position leading our new Extreme Weather Applications Laboratory. We want to expand your work into civilian emergency response and climate change adaptation strategies. Elena felt honored by the offer, but she had already made decisions about her future direction based on the lessons learned during Operation Arctic Shield. Dr. Patterson, I appreciate the offer, but I have accepted a permanent position with the Air Force as Director of Meteorological Operations Research. I want to continue developing these techniques where they can have the most immediate impact on life and death situations. Dr. Patterson nodded with understanding. Dr. Vasquez, that's exactly the kind of practical application focus that the scientific community needs more of. Your work has shown how theoretical research can be directly applied to solve real-world problems. Elena smiled, remembering her journal entry from that historic day 6 months earlier. Dr. Patterson, Operation Arctic Shield taught me that scientific knowledge becomes truly meaningful only when it's applied to serve human needs. I want to spend my career at that intersection between discovery and application. As Elena left the Pentagon following her presentation, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her from an isolated researcher to one of the world's leading experts in extreme weather aviation. The experience had validated her belief that scientific work should serve to protect and save lives, not just advance theoretical understanding. Elena's phone buzzed with a text message from Captain Morrison, who had been promoted to Major following his heroic performance during Operation Arctic Shield. Dr. Vasquez, congratulations on your Pentagon presentation. The techniques you've developed are being used by rescue teams around the world. Those 6 researchers we saved were just the beginning. Elena smiled as she read the message, remembering the intensity and fear of that historic rescue mission and comparing it to the systematic scientific approach that extreme weather navigation had become through months of development and refinement. Major Morrison, thank you for your message. I'm proud that our work together has become the foundation for saving so many lives in extreme conditions. Elena paused to write a longer response, reflecting on the broader implications of their collaboration. The most important lesson from Operation Arctic Shield was that breakthrough achievements come from combining different types of expertise under pressure. Your aviation skills and my meteorological knowledge together accomplished something that neither could have achieved alone. Major Morrison's response came quickly. Dr. Vasquez, that collaboration model is now being applied to military operations around the world. We're pairing meteorologists with pilots, engineers with tacticians, and scientists with operators to solve problems that traditional approaches couldn't handle. Elena felt a deep sense of satisfaction as she realized that Operation Arctic Shield had demonstrated not just new technical capabilities, but new approaches to problem solving that were being applied across multiple domains. The integration of scientific expertise with operational execution had created a template for tackling challenges that exceeded the capabilities of any single discipline. As Elena returned to her hotel near the Pentagon, she opened her laptop to review the final report she was preparing for the International Conference on Arctic Meteorology. The report would document not just the technical aspects of extreme weather navigation, but the broader lessons about interdisciplinary collaboration and the practical application of scientific research. The successful execution of Operation Arctic Shield, Elena wrote, demonstrates that the most significant advances in both scientific understanding and practical capabilities come from combining theoretical knowledge with operational expertise under real-world conditions. The techniques developed during the rescue mission have applications far beyond their original context. Elena continued writing, documenting her thoughts about the future direction of extreme weather research and operations. Climate change is creating increasingly extreme weather conditions that will require new approaches to both scientific analysis and practical response. The integration of advanced meteorological analysis with operational capabilities provides a model for addressing these challenges effectively. Elena paused in her writing to look out her hotel window at the Washington, D.C. skyline, thinking about how far she had come from that isolated research station in the Arctic. The most meaningful aspect of this work is its direct impact on human safety and survival. Every technique we develop, every procedure we refine, and every training program we establish has the potential to save lives under conditions where conventional approaches would fail. As Elena completed her report, she felt a deep sense of purpose and accomplishment that had been missing from her previous research career. The combination of scientific discovery and practical application that had defined Operation Arctic Shield had become the foundation for a new career direction that fulfilled her deepest motivations for pursuing atmospheric physics. Elena closed her laptop and prepared for sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new weather systems to analyze, and new opportunities to apply her expertise in service of others.
The 6 researchers rescued during Operation Arctic Shield had been just the beginning of a career dedicated to using scientific knowledge to save lives under the most extreme conditions nature could create. Outside her hotel window, the lights of Washington, D.C. twinkled in the clear night sky, and Elena felt a profound sense of gratitude for the sequence of events that had transformed her from an isolated academic into a key contributor to one of the most important advances in extreme weather operations in modern history. Tomorrow would bring new storms to study and new lives to protect. But tonight, she could rest knowing that her work had found its true purpose in the intersection between scientific understanding and human survival. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.